The United States has now sent Iran a 15-point plan to end the war in the Middle East as fighting rattles the region and economic fallout continues to escalate. That's according to the New York Times, citing two officials briefed on the diplomacy who say the plan was delivered by way of Pakistan. The paper notes it's unclear how widely the plan's been shared among Iranian officials, though, and it also remains unclear whether Iran will accept any offer or if Israel is on board with the proposal. We've talked about how the U.S. and Israeli views might diverge at a point like this. Officials tell the Times the plan addresses Iran's ballistic missile and nuclear programs. The Wall Street Journal, meanwhile, cites officials who say the document calls on Iran to dismantle its three main nuclear sites and end any enrichment on Iranian soil, as well as suspend its ballistic missile work, curb support for proxies, and fully reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The officials add that Iran would, in return, have nuclear-related sanctions lifted, and the U.S. would assist while monitoring the country's civilian nuclear program. The Journal also reports that mediators from Turkey, Egypt, and Pakistan are pushing to have a meeting arranged between U.S. and Iranian officials sometime in the next 48 hours, but both sides remain far apart. In a sign of that distance, shortly after the 15-point plan was submitted to Iran, the country's military mocked the attempts for peace. Speaking in a pre-recorded video that aired on state TV, an Iranian military spokesperson put it like this, quote, "Have your internal conflicts reached the point where you're negotiating with yourselves?" He added, quote, "Our first and last word has been the same from day one, and it will stay that way. Someone like us will never come to terms with someone like you. Not now, not ever." However, in the Oval Office yesterday afternoon, President Trump continued to claim negotiations were happening and that they involved Vice President J.D. Vance, as well as Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Jared Kushner, and Steve Witkoff. The president was then asked about whether he could trust the people the U.S. is negotiating with, leading to this odd exchange.
Why do you say, what makes you trust? Do you think I trust them? I don't trust them.
Then why bother talking to them?
Because they're going to make a deal. They're going to make a deal. They did something yesterday that was amazing, actually. They gave us a present, and the present arrived today. And it was a very big present worth a tremendous amount of money. And I'm not going to tell you what that present is, but it was a very significant prize. And they gave it to us, and they said they were going to give it. So that meant one thing to me: we're dealing with the right people.
Is that nuclear related?
No, it wasn't nuclear related. It was oil and gas related. And it was a very nice thing they did. But what it showed me is that we're dealing with the right people.
Okay, so what? The White House hasn't commented on what the prize or present was that the president says he got. And Politico reports that several people close to the White House actually said they were also baffled by the president's remarks. I want to bring in MS Now White House reporter Laura Barron-Lopez. Maybe you can help unconfuse us. I don't know. What is the president? What is the present? What is the prize? And more importantly, what does it signal about where the White House is at right now in these potential negotiations?
I don't know what the prize is, Allie. We don't know what the prize is. We don't know what that present is, other than the president saying it has to do with oil and gas, maybe the Strait of Hormuz. But again, we don't have any answers. And that's not the only thing we don't have answers on. You know, the president yesterday and all this week contradicts himself. 1 minute saying that we've won the war, the next minute saying he's negotiating with Iran and having talks, and that they've agreed, that they have already agreed on some kind of parameters when it comes to their nuclear weapons program. But then Iran comes out and says, no, there are no negotiations, there are no talks. And then, of course, last night, this offer of the 15-point plan that we don't have hard specifics on, other than what you outlined, which is being reported. And all simultaneously, as a source that was briefed on the planning told me, that the U.S. is preparing to deploy some potentially at least up to 3,000 troops with the 82nd Airborne out of Fort Bragg. It's an Army division, and to the Middle East. So again, saying that we may be near a peace deal, may be near an end to the war from the president, while he's simultaneously building up troops in the region.
And part of me wonders, because I've had Republicans say to me that A, they want to give the president space on this, but B, that the White House itself wants a short conflict, anywhere between 4 and 6 weeks, and we are within that time frame right now. But when you look at the fact that what they are saying doesn't match necessarily the actions of moving assets into the region, we've actually been here before, prior to the start of this specific conflict. And so we talk a lot, our friend Joe Scarborough and others, about the signal versus the noise. Where should we be looking right now? How are you talking to your sources about what the actual thing to pay attention is here? Because there's a lot of confusion.
I think that it's clear that the president and those around him do want to find an off-ramp.
Yeah.
The question is, how close is the U.S. actually to finding that? Especially when the president is, on one hand, saying that, he's willing to accept certain parameters. I mean, we don't really know exactly what an obliteration of their nuclear weapons program looks like. Yeah. What does it look like to not be able to rebuild? And you see the president...
Because they did it last summer.
Right, and you see the president talk about that in real time as he's working it out. Just earlier this week, working out in front of reporters as he's being asked questions whether or not the U.S. is going to jointly have control of the Strait of Hormuz, an issue that didn't exist prior to the war. Obviously, and something the president was warned about. And so we're questioning if they're looking for an off-ramp in Iran, frankly, if Iran will allow them to have it as well. And then, of course, there's the off-ramp domestically that it's clear Republicans are looking for, because with travel troubles deepening at airports across the country, TSA agents set to miss a second paycheck on Friday, lawmakers still appear to be struggling to reach a deal that would reopen the Department of Homeland Security. Senate Republicans sent their latest offer to Democrats yesterday that would have ended the partial government shutdown. The proposal would have funded most of DHS, except for part that deals with immigration and customs enforcement, the parts responsible for arresting and deporting undocumented immigrants. But top Senate Democrats argued the offer doesn't include any new restrictions on ICE, something the party's been demanding for weeks. It's why we're still in this shutdown. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said yesterday Democrats will send Republicans a counteroffer. Watch.
We need strong reforms, and we need to rein in ICE. We've been consistent in what we've been asking for from the get-go.
And so as the impasse drags on, the Transportation Security Administration says roughly 460 TSA officers have quit since the start of this funding dispute. I've had lawmakers say to me that they go home, they talk to TSA agents, they just feel like ping pong balls in a political match that nobody wants to be a part of. And yet there they are at the center of it, typically a pain point that pushes people to the negotiating table. And it is. But I'm just struck by the ways that every time it looks like a deal's coming together on the Hill, the president comes in and just sprinkles more doubt and confusion on top of the process. He's for a deal. He hates a deal that they do. Where is the White House in this? And do they see TSA as the actual pain point that lawmakers on the Hill seem to believe it is?
I think that given the polling and given the pressure that the president, the White House, that Republicans are feeling, they do understand that it is a pain point. Yeah. But the question is, I mean, we saw this play out so many times during the first Trump administration. When Republicans and Democrats thought they had almost reached a deal, then the president would pull the rug out from under them. And he did that this week, as you were reporting and our other colleagues were reporting, which is that they said, we think we've reached a deal where we can fund all these other parts of DHS, just not ICE. And he said no. And that may be where it ultimately ends up. But again, you're starting to see that especially the White House, along with some Republicans, don't necessarily want to talk about ICE and DHS and that unpopular part of the agency, given the president's mass deportation campaign. But the president also doesn't like to back down. And so you're seeing that play out right now, where he wants what he wants, and he attempted to tether the Save America Act that requires proof of citizenship. It's not even truly a voter ID law, but it's something that he is trying to get done as you see him frantically worry about the midterm election.
Yeah, can we also unpack the part where they are talking about reopening DHS right now? And the reason Democrats are saying no is because the deal that was on the table was, okay, we'll fund everything except for DHS and anything related to immigration enforcement. By the way, they're already paid through a different mechanism, so it almost doesn't matter. But they were going to let that go through with no new guardrails on ICE, even as the administration, through Markwayne Mullin and others, were saying, we're going to abide by judicial warrants. That was a key piece that Democrats were pushing for. I mean, doesn't it tell the story that the White House actually recognizes that there is a need to introduce some new guardrail to an immigration system that polling shows and underscores Americans feel has gotten out of control?
I think there are some people within the White House and around the president that are willing to say that there should be some parameters around ICE, or that the approach should change. I mean, you did hear the now sworn-in Secretary Mullin talk about that during his hearing. The question, though, is what about the other forces in the White House? What about Stephen Miller? What about Tom Homan? Tom Homan says there is going to be a more targeted approach, but they are still arresting and attempting to deport what Homan calls collateral. Those are people that have no criminal history, that have been in the U.S. in some cases for decades, have families here. They are now more increasingly targeting dreamers. Again, people with legal or some form of protected status who thought that they were going about it the right way. The administration is not backing off on arresting and attempting to deport those immigrants. So on one hand, we may not see surges the way we saw in Minneapolis, but on the other hand, they are still moving forward with a very aggressive attempt to meet quotas, whether it's arrest or deportation quotas. And that includes people that have no criminal history.
Yep. And so there's the chatter of what they might do and then the actualities of what they are doing. And you're doing such an exceptional job of covering that and the impact on families here in the U.S. MS Now White House reporter Laura Barón Lopez, thank you for coming on a bunch of topics. We've been busy. Thank you.